What time are we starting, Naomi?
Well, I think this would be a good time to start.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Tatjana Lichtenstein. I'm the director of the Schusterman Center for Jewish Studies. And I'm just starting out here to promote a panel we are having on Thursday, late afternoon, early evening on, it's a UT faculty panel discussion on anti-Semitism and the far right in America, which of course has caused many of us concern for a few years now, but really kind of culminated in the events at the United States Capitol in January. And we're going to have four panelists for this discussion. Hina Assam from Middle Eastern Studies, Jeremy Suri from Department of History and at the LBJ School, Christopher Wiles from American Studies, and John Hoberman for Germanic Studies. They'll each be giving some thoughts, making a short presentation, but then it's really going to be a panel discussion and a discussion with the audience. So it's on Thursday, this Thursday, March 11th, 5:30 to 6:45 p.m. You do need to register online and will then be given a link. And since it's a webinar, you can post your Q&A, your questions in the Q&A for that panelist. And I want to just mention that this panel has been organized by Associate Director for the Schusterman Center, Dr. Jonathan Kaplan, who will also be one of the moderators for the panel.
Thank you, Tatiana. Welcome to this talk by Mariusz Kałczewiak. It is sponsored by the Gale Collaborative on Jewish Life in the Americas, which is one of the programs that operates under the umbrella of the Schusterman Center for Jewish Studies. And before we start, I'd like to mention the next lecture, sponsored by our sub-program, April 7th at 12 o'clock. Andrew Porwanker from the University of Oklahoma will speak on the Jewish world of Alexander Hamilton. He will defend the thesis that Alexander Hamilton was born and raised Jewish, which is the topic of his forthcoming book of the same title. So getting to our talk today, Mariusz Kałczewiak, he's a PhD, currently Senior Research Associate and Lecturer in the Eastern European Studies Department, University of Potsdam, Germany. His academic interests include masculinity studies, Latin American Jewish studies, Yiddish studies, Eastern European studies. And following his undergraduate studies at Warsaw in 2017, he earned his PhD in history from Tel Aviv University. And his first book, here it is, Polacos in Argentina, Polish Jews, Interwar Migration and the Emergence of Transatlantic Jewish Culture, appeared in 2020, Alabama University Press. I've actually read it 3 times. Once when I was reading it as a dissertation, Tel Aviv University asked me to read his dissertation. Then I just read it because it was a book that interested me. And finally, I read it when I was on a book award committee, and I enjoyed it all 3 times. It won the book award. It won the 2020 Best Book Award from the Latin American Jewish Studies Association. And he's published journal articles, American Jewish History, Eastern European Jewish Affairs, Jewish Culture and History. And he's held a lot of different fellowships in history and Jewish studies, graduate fellowships, postgraduate. He's been on various fellowships at Brandeis, University of Florida, the Poland Museum of the History of Polish Jews, etc. His current research project explores the evolution of Polish Jewish masculinities between the 1890s and the 1930s. And it's about how Polish Jewish ideals of manliness were constructed and performed. Makes the argument that gender is a productive perspective for studying ethnic history in Eastern Europe. Today, his talk is on the topic of his book, Polacos in Argentina. And before we start, if you have questions, which I hope you will, I would like you to keep them for the end. And the best way to do it is to put your questions in chat, and I'll try to make sure that nobody's question is neglected. Okay, Mariusz, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Thank you to the Schusterman Center for hosting me, and thank you to Galit for organizing the event. event, I feel really honored that I can speak in Austin. I mean, theoretically in Austin, and I'm very glad that Latin American Jewish studies are now being more and more featured in Jewish studies programming. While in Austin you have a well-defined Latin American Jewish studies focus, it's still not the case everywhere. So I will start sharing my presentation. Just a second. Do you see the presentation right now? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So my talk today is largely based on my research project on Polish Jews migrating to Argentina in the 1920s and 1930s. It was my doctoral research project, which in 2020 was published in book form, as Naomi mentioned, as Polacos in Argentina, Polish Jews, Interwar Migration and the Emergence of Transatlantic Jewish Culture by Alabama University Press. I will start with saying a few words about what first made me do the research on Polish Jewish immigration to Argentina, and then I will move to speaking about the key arguments of my book and offering a few examples or case studies. As a matter of one sentence overview, my book deals with Polish Jewish immigration to Argentina in the 1920s and 1930s. And gives a special attention to Yiddish culture as a space linking Poland and Argentina. While Argentina has the 7th biggest Jewish community in the world, and its Jewish history dates back more than 150 years, the country is still perceived as little Jewish or non-Jewish, and Argentina's Jewish history is still commonly reduced to some special case or something exotic. And my research is a certain corrective and an attempt to look at the Jewish experience in Argentina in the context of European Jewish history. My book looks at the cultural, social, and discursive links between Poland and Argentina and suggests that Polish and Argentine history need to be studied next to each other. We cannot understand the Argentine Jewish history without studying the Polish past, which formed the immigrants, and we cannot understand Polish Jewry without paying attention to its transnational ties. And when I embarked on this project, I was struck by a number of issues. First, by how the agricultural Jewish colonization in Argentina is overshadowing the urban experience of the immigrants. Ivan Czechowski's book, Recuerdos de Mosesville, Memories from Mosesville, very well shows how the colonization and Jewish farming became Argentine Jewish founding myth and the center of Argentine Jewish mythology. While the colonies were a cornerstone of the community, already in the first decade of the 20th century, many more Jews lived in Buenos Aires than in the colonies. It seemed to me that the experience of Eastern European Jewish immigrants, and specifically Buenos Aires Yiddish environment, didn't get enough attention, both in the scholarship and in the way how Argentine Jewish history is being popularly narrated. In that sense, one of the objectives of my research was to put a greater emphasis on the Jewish life in Buenos Aires. Second, I was surprised many scholars and contemporary Jewish Argentines themselves perceived leaving Poland for Argentina as a natural development. I don't need to say that most people stayed where they were and didn't live nor for Argentina, nor for Palestine, nor for other countries. And came to the conclusion that in fact we know very little about what immigrants knew about Argentina before they left Eastern Europe. We don't know via what channels they gathered the knowledge, and more broadly, what was the elite and popular discourse on Argentina and Eastern Europe. It was important for me to see the Jewish immigrants as independent actors with agency, designing their own future, and not passive victims of oppression, discrimination, as people who are brought to the Americas. My third problem was the narrow perspective on the meanings of the country of origin for immigrants after the immigration. while now we take it for granted that the place from which people come from possesses multiple and critical meanings for immigrant populations, in the context of immigration from Eastern Europe, the divorce from the past and an unquestioned desire to forget and shed the past away is still for many a very valid perspective. So the goal of my book was to examine what meanings had Eastern Europe, and Poland specifically, for those Jews who settled in Argentina. I'm interested in migration as a continuous process, not a one-way movement starting on boarding the ship and ending in transforming into an Argentine Jews. I suggest that migration created a new type of diasporic belonging, not related to Zion, but to Poland, imagined as a center of Eastern European Jewish civilization. I want now to throw some basic facts and numbers so that we better understand where we are and about what do we speak. So the 6 decades between 1870s and 1930s are a period of mass immigration to Argentina. In 1870, Argentina had I believe 2 million people, and in 1939, 14 million. In 1914, a half of Buenos Aires residents was foreign-born. Argentina was interested in attracting European migrants to help develop the country and hoped to recruit West and North Europeans who were associated with entrepreneurial skills. The immigration was linked also to the process of whitening of Argentina, which the government hoped to achieve. European migrants were associated with civilizatory powers, which was to counterbalance, as it was perceived by Argentine President Domingo Sarmiento, the indigenous barbarity. While most immigrants arrived from Spain and Italy, immigrants from Poland, both Jews and Christians, were the third biggest group in the 1920s and 1930s. Argentina experienced 2 distinct migration waves, which you can see now on the presentation. The first one from the 1890s until World War I, and the second one following the war in the 1920s and 1930s. In each of these migration waves, about 90 or like 100,000 Jewish immigrants arrived to Argentina. In the 1930s, the Jewish population reached 280,000, and in the second half of the 1920s, Argentina attracted 43% of world Jewish immigrants. Speaking about Poland, between 1915 and 1939, 190,000 people left for Argentina, including 35% Jews. So we speak basically of a group of 60,000 Polish Jews who settled in Argentina in the interwar period. And this is basically a half of the immigration to Palestine in these 2 decades. And Palestine, in fact, became more attractive only in the 1930s, wherein Argentina was starting to close its gates. So, so there is a number of issues which guided me through this research project on ethnic identity in the context of migration. So I studied the generation of migrants, that is Polish Jews who left for Argentina. I suggest that the experience of migration transformed them into Argentine Jews, while their children socialized in Argentina were already Jewish Argentines. I suggest that the immigration of Polish Jews to Argentina in the 1920s and 1930s contributed to what I call a temporary re-Yiddishization of Argentine Jewish life. The migrants from the 1920s differed significantly from those who arrived in the 1890s from areas located farther to the east. Most of Jewish immigrants to Argentina arrived only after the Russian Revolution of 1905, that is 20 years later than to the United States, what also had a kind of influence on the character of this immigration. We speak of people who in Europe experience secular Yiddish culture and politics, who work in the factories, who already in Eastern Europe were to a certain extent distanced from the tradition. In Argentina, they helped to build a Yiddish culture based on contents and values they acquired back in Poland. A shared Yiddish language allowed for a transmission of cultural and political contents across the Atlantic. And I believe that it's important not to look at the Yiddish culture in Argentina as a nostalgic link with the past. In those years, Eastern Europe was a reservoir of ideas for Jewish future, and getting involved in the global politics of the Yiddish land, Argentine Jews attempted to imagine themselves as active and powerful, and not peripheral, how they were often perceived in Europe. So I suggest that the immigration from Poland to Argentina was a kind of creative tension between Argentine assimilating nationalism, Jewish ethno-national movements, and the powers of diasporism. And these two movements, nationalism and diasporism, weren't exclusive. Becoming Argentines didn't mean that the migrants shed away their diasporic links or a sense of obligation. I suggest that migrants search for ways which would allow them to imagine themselves as proud Argentines and simultaneously as nationally engaged and transnationally active Jews. And this was especially visible in the case of Landsmannschaft and fundraising for diverse progressive Jewish causes in Eastern Europe, including the secular Yiddish schools or the Ivo Institute. The immigrants were proud to offer this help as Argentine help and simultaneously to invest in the global Jewish causes. I will now move to offering you some case studies or insights into specific discursive narratives which I identified. I will start with the way how Polish Jews imagined Argentina before the migration. So initially, at the very end of the 19th century, immigration to Argentina was discussed only in elite Polish and Hebrew Jewish press, and was approached very, very ambivalently. For instance, in 1905, in a Polish language Jewish journal Izraelita, Jakub Kohn applauded Jewish colonization in Argentina. He believed that those who, quote, suffocate in poverty would do anything to leave Russian Poland. In his opinion, the task of the Jewish elite was to assist fellow Jews whom, quote, circumstances had brought to the verge of an abyss. On the other hand, Nahum Sokolov, writing for the same journal, was convinced that immigration couldn't be a solution for the entire Jewish people, even not for the poor with no backgrounds. Sokolov believed that Polish masculine knew the people better than Western European men of charity, as Baron de Hirsch, who initiated the colonization project. And Sokolov saw more room for a social work in Poland rather than rushing with immigration. Some Polish masculine regarded immigration as a form of defeatism and implicit acknowledgement that Jewish integration in circles had nothing to offer the poor. With time, however, when the immigration became a social phenomenon rather than a plan discussed by the activists, the elite journals developed a supportive stand and expressed a certain pride in the accomplishments of the Jewish colonists. While the Jewish elite press in Eastern Europe was discussing the chances of immigration to Argentina, thousands of Jews voted with their legs and indeed were leaving to Argentina. Altogether, before the World War I, around 90,000 Eastern European Jews settled in Argentina. Most of them came from the Pale of settlement in Russian Empire, mostly from the areas in the east of the Pale, rather from the lands of future Poland. Many immigrants arrived from Podolia, Volhynia, Bessarabia, and let's try to think for a while about the practicalities of such a journey. How does one organize immigration, and who emigrates? How a person living in a shtetl for whom the most distant travel was often a trip to the provincial town on a market day. So people who began to think about immigration needed a competent advice. For some of them, the regional branches of the Jewish Colonization Association were of help. In addition, at the turn of the 1890s, in Eastern Europe circulated diverse immigration pamphlets, which informed the immigrants about opportunities and dangers waiting for them in Argentina. Some of them, like the book Die Beschreibung von Argentina und ihre Kolonien, Description of Argentina and its colonies by Janke Jedwabnik, gave precise description of Argentine economy, society, politics, and climate. Jedwabnik pictured Argentina as a place, I quote, where the civilization is well rooted, end of quote, and thus not a dangerous destination. Other publications such as Argentina, Weiss wohin ihr fort, Argentina, Nowhere Do You Go To, were much more critical of chances awaiting in Latin America. This brochure, written under a pseudonym by an unknown author, pictured Argentina as a hell on earth. It referred to exhausting and humiliating ship travel in the steerage and the dangers awaiting for immigrants on their way. So obviously, these negative descriptions refer to suspicion which immigration raised among the Jewish elite, among the Jewish religious establishment, and the Russian authorities. These groups feared of losing the control over the Jewish masses, and possibly the pamphlets painting Argentina in darkest colors were commissioned by those circles opposing the immigration. In the interwar years, that is 1920s, 1930s, Argentina was essentialized and exoticized in Yiddish popular discourse in Poland. This obviously referred to women trafficking and Jewish prostitution in Argentina. Polish Yiddish newspapers were overflown with reports about young women being forced into sex work on the other side of Atlantic. As an example, can serve this article from the Warsaw Daily Hind. Wie Weißsklavenhändler vernahren die jüdische Mädchen von Polen in Argentina, what means how the white slave traffickers from Argentina seduce Jewish girls from Poland. So those articles had a chilling effect on immigration as such and female immigration specifically. Even though the Jewish prostitution was something absolutely common also in Eastern Europe, the link between migration, Argentina, and sex work appeared in the news as horrendous and unexpected. In Polish Jewish press, we hardly ever find Argentina in context different from female trafficking. Then the only exception was naturally immigration, and newspapers included many reports and advertisements of transatlantic liners, such as those which you see now on the slide. One of the important discursive spaces which I studied were Yiddish travelogues published by Eastern European Jews who visited Argentina. I studied the works by Perez Hirschbein, von Weite Länder, Brazil, Argentina, Juni-November 1914, published 1916, and Argentinische Reise by Hersch-David Nomberg from 1924, reporting on his visit in 1922. And both books appeared earlier in installments in Yiddish newspapers. So we might ask ourselves, what was the meaning of these publications in Eastern Europe? I suggest that these travelogues were showing how the Yiddish civilization extended to the Southern Hemisphere. The travels are evidence of the new diasporization of Jewish life, of the emergence of new Yiddish centers. Both Nomberg and Hirschbein saw Argentina as a laboratory, not only where Jewish life, but specifically Yiddish cultural life could find a safe haven. What was for me the most interesting was how Jewish travelers look on Argentina. What is the focus of their travel writing and how their travel writing differs from British or French texts. So first of all, it's it's problematic to look on Yiddish travelogues written by Eastern European Jews as a colonialist literature. Although it is tempting to look at Nomberg and Hirschbein as typical Europeans searching for exotic and unknown, they were much different from West European travelers. First of all, the describers and the described are very close to each other. On both sides, we have Eastern European Jews rather than whites and the indigenous population. Both groups speak Yiddish and share a common experience of living in Eastern Europe. At the same time, white and European Hirschbein and Nomberg were also Jewish, what made them in a certain sense weaker and not exactly corresponding with a stereotypical Western explorer. Behind the Jewish travelers, there was no colonial empire which would capitalize on the narratives. And I suggest that the approach of Hirschbein and Nomberg wasn't colonialist, but it was Eurocentric. They looked on Argentina from a perspective of Eastern European Jewish cultural tradition, which was in their perception natural and obvious, and Argentine reality, which didn't correspond with their view of the world, was exoticized and presented as chaotic, backward, and inferior. I was also interested in looking at Hirschbein's and Nomberg's visit in Argentina in the local context, in Argentine context. So their visits were unusual meetings of representatives of high Yiddish culture with Yiddish-speaking immigrants from Eastern Europe. During their visits in Argentina, both authors turned into celebrities of Jewish Argentina. These steps were carefully followed and reported in the press. The visits of both authors were an opportunity for Argentine Jews to present their engagement in the development of Yiddish culture and their devotedness to shared cultural goals. For Hirschbein, it was, for instance, surprising how strong was the Yiddish culture in Argentina and the level of the interest in Yiddish cultural developments in Eastern Europe. And the travelers described Argentina both as Jewish and as non-Jewish space. Most of the people and places they described are Jewish. Nevertheless, both travelers painted a picture of Jewish Argentina as shaped by local conditions. The travelers wanted to see Argentine Jewish community and not a replica of something from Eastern Europe, and mocked those immigrants who nostalgically looked back. So first of all, both travelers wrote extensively about Jewish agricultural colonies. It was something Jewish and it was something unusual for the Eastern European Jewish readers. Nomberg pictured the colonies as brave pioneers who fought against the powerful nature and thanks to their perseverance managed to subdue the wild Argentine pampa. At the same time, the travelers were aware that their readers look for entertainment. Consequently, they depicted Argentina as foreign and dangerous, and they referred to popular in Eastern Europe portrayals of Argentina as a center of female trafficking. Yet, while in Poland, the prostitution was almost the only dimension in which Argentina was known, in books by Hirschbein and Nomberg, Argentina was presented in a broad perspective. And many Argentine Jews believed that these travelogues partially normalized the image of Argentina in Eastern Europe. As a space of exotization served non-Jewish Argentina, and both authors generously reproduced diverse stereotypes. For Hirschbein, Spanish people were hot and temperamental, what allegedly became even more visible after, quote, mixing with the Indian blood, end of quote. Nomberg admitted that arriving to Argentina, he, quote, searched for red Indians and Jewish prostitutes, end of quote. So both authors were gladly transmitting the gossips they heard from the Jewish settlers, and the Jewish immigrants served for both travelers as as guides for local Argentine social hierarchies. An important, I think some people are still joining. I'm not sure if Galit is admitting the people, but okay. So an important aspect of Jewish immigration history are the Landsmannschaften, that is the societies uniting migrants coming from the same town or region. The Landsmannschaften were established basically in every country to which Jews migrated, in the United States, Canada, Australia, Israel, and I guess some of you are familiar with the post-Holocaust activity of the Landsmannschaften when they have been involved in publishing the so-called Historbücher, that is the memorial books of vanished Eastern European Jewish communities. But the history of Landsmannschaften is much longer and much more complex. So we can differentiate between diverse function and diverse stages of the Landsmannschaft history. During the initial period, following the migration, it was mainly the self-help, self-assistance. Then the Landsmannschaften were establishing help funds for sick or jobless members, for orphans and elderly, and were helping members to achieve a certain economic stability. And the second stage, which was especially interesting for me during my research, is a time where members were already rooted in the new country. And in this period, Landsmannschaften were a space of ethnic empowerment and a space of transnational engagement. In my book, Polacos in Argentina, I studied the Polish Verband, the Union of Polish Jews in Argentina. So the Polish Verband was established in 1916 during World War I, as most of other regional Landsmannschaften, like the Galicianer Verband or Bessaraberverein, and the membership of this Landsmannschaft was never clear and was fluctuating. It was somewhere between 500 people and 3,000 members, which obviously represented only a minority of Jewish immigrants. The Polish Verband was a male-only association, but in the 1930s, a female section was established, and women were in fact very much involved in the work of the Polish Verband, especially in organizing the community events. And while earlier scholarship underlined the insularity or backwardness of the Landsmannschaften, presenting them as a kind of milieu which was against the adaptation to the rules of a new country, and kind of worked in order to preserve an outdated form of Jewish community, I do not agree with these voices, and I see Landsmannschaften and specifically Polish Verband as a space which allows the migrants to combine the Jewish ethnic belonging with the process of acquiring Argentine identity. So a good example were the regular picnics organized by the Polish Verband. The very practice of communal picnics was something specific for many groups within Argentine society. And for instance, one picnic organized in 1933 included an actress, Renée Waxman, who didn't perform in Yiddish, but recited poems in Spanish by a famous poet, Rubén Darío. During another picnic, played both Jewish and Italian orchestra, and essentially Argentine foods such as the asado were served. So the picnics, which included only Jews, marked the borders of the ethnic community, but the cultural program and the food served were evidence of the process of becoming Argentines. One of another space of Landsman activities which I studied were the fundraising campaigns for diverse causes in Eastern Europe. Quite often the Landsman events were organized within the larger fundraising campaigns, which underlined the transatlantic loyalties that many Polish Jews wish to maintain after the migration. As an example can serve the campaign organized in 1931 for the benefit of the secular Jewish schools in Poland, the CISO schools. Polish Verband developed an ethnic discourse shaped by solidarity towards the fellow Jews in Poland. The Polish Verband saw the Jews in Poland as Brüder in Polen, the brothers in Poland who were in political and economic crisis. The landslide, the members of the Landsmannschaft talked about a national obligation of help towards the Jews in Poland. According to their understanding of solidarity, Jewish Poland provided them with cultural capital, meaning Jewish education, space for political and cultural development, which they were now supposed to repay as Argentine Jews by offering financial assistance to Jewish educational initiatives in Poland. And their assistance was, of course, expected in Poland, as living in Argentina, they lived in a more democratic and a more liberal country and often made careers as merchants and businessmen. As many members of the Polish Verband were rooted in the progressive Yiddish culture, the CISO schools, which symbolized progressive and secular variation of Polish Jewish life, these goals found a significant support among Polish Verband members. The campaigns, of course, addressed a broader Argentine Jewish community, but the leaders of Polish Verband played a key role in the fundraising effort. The fundraising campaigns defined Polish Jews in Argentina as loyal and committed both to their native country and to modern Jewish social and cultural life. At the same time, marking their help as Argentine Jewish assistants, the supporters raised the claim for Argentina's place within the topography of the Jewish world. May I ask how much time do I still have?
I think this would be a good time for you to start wrapping up.
Okay. I will. I mean, I still had some slides, but maybe I will. Well, I wanted to speak a bit, about the language issue and the language transition, which was one of the crucial issues in the 1930s. So maybe I will just I will speak for a while about this kind of like how should I put it, about the need, like Jewish Argentine need for recognition from Eastern Europe.
That sounds
yeah. So as you might see, as you might see on this slide, Jewish Argentina as a cultural space and individual actors themselves had the sense of being peripheral and being kind of at the margin of the Jewish world. So this is a quote from Josef Mendelssohn, written in 1990. The Jewish Argentina, I want to say, still is and probably will still be for many years an unknown land, terra ignota for the broad Jewish public in Russia and America. Argentina is still one of those distant lands which the broad Jewish world doesn't comprehend or almost doesn't comprehend. Argentina is distant from the great Jewish world, from the grand Jewish centers of Europe and North America. This is a distance that can be felt in a way how they imagine us and in the way how we think about ourselves. And this sense of, this need, I mean, like really like a burning need for external recognition can be also traced very nicely in this quote from Lazaro Żytnicki, who was an Argentine Jewish journalist, writing in a text published in 1932 in Warsaw for the highbrow literary Yiddish magazine Literarische Blätter. And he writes, in the European Jewish literature, it became a tradition to give very little attention to the young Argentine Jewish kibbutz. Only rarely the press mentions our work and life. there is very little attention for Argentine Jewish literature. Yet, this is a big mistake towards a younger brother who struggles to achieve something that would be useful also for the older brothers. So there is this sense of Argentine Jewish achievement in the field of Yiddish culture, which Argentine Jews do not feel that they are recognized enough for, recognized enough for it, and this is something which appears in many sources, and I think I would be. This is one of the few examples of this external recognition from Eastern Europe, which was granted to Argentina. It was a special issue of literarische Blätter in Warsaw devoted to Argentine Yiddish writing. But as I said, it was let's say like one time case. So I think I won't be offering any conclusions. I think you got many insights from my work. Of course, it was just a fragment of what appears in the book, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariusz. I know this research well, but every time I delve into it, I discover more things. It's just a very thorough, very nuanced work of research. So now, if you have questions, this would be a really great time to start entering them into the chat.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we have one from Sandy Deutsch. You can see it, right, Mariusz?
Yeah, just a second. Yeah.
By contributing to Jewish causes in Poland. Can you see that one?
I mean, I think it was. I wouldn't in this place I wouldn't judge if they were successful in defying those images that existed before. But I think you are right that that like the financial assistance and offering financial help to this landmark institutions such as the IF or the Cisha schools, it was kind of like an attempt of rebranding Argentine Jews as a vital and as I said, as a responsible part of Eastern European Jewish diaspora.
Okay, and we have one from Sal Brody. To what extent is Yiddish still spoken in Buenos Aires today?
I think there we have some people from Buenos Aires, so they might be better to ask. But I mean,
Perla Sneg is here. Should we put her?
Of course, I mean, of course, you have a community of aficionados who are learning Yiddish and speaking Yiddish, and but I think like I mean. I think the general conclusion would be that the vitality of Yiddish in Argentina, it lasted longer in Argentina than in the United States, for instance. I mean, still like in 1950s, 1960s. I mean, I think the teacher seminar in Buenos Aires was still existing in the 1960s. So, I mean, the fact that the Jews began to immigrate to Argentina later than to the States, it kind of like moves everything 20 years forward, I would say. So, so when in the States, the Yiddish is kind of 1930s, 1940s, it's already kind of like losing its standing. Argentina, in fact, after the Holocaust, appears as one of the leading centers of Yiddish publishing. But now, I mean, of course, it's marginal.
Okay. The person I referred to was Perla Sneg. She's with us. She's a distinguished expert on Buenos Aires Yiddish and did a famous exhibit on this very topic. So I'm pleased she's here. So we have a question also from our director, Tatiana Lichtenstein, the image of the Jewish cowboy.
Just a second. This it became so. I think it's a good trope that you are suggesting. I mean, if you that a settler kind of like a explorer of a frontier, it's usually male, right? And the male settler becomes a kind of like emblem of a specific cultural space, which is the colony, and then as you write, a prostitute, which is a urban development. I think it's a very nice. I to tell the truth, I didn't think about it, but it's a very, very nice division there which you suggest, and I think it refers also to the American space. I mean, and like the Jews in the West, right, and exploring the frontier and looking at this, looking at immigration in the context of gender. Yeah, I think you are. I mean, you're absolutely right, and it's worth exploring this issue further.
And it looks as if Sandy Deutsch has more of a comment, right, than a question.
Where did San?
About political divisions.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, the politic. I mean, the image of a cowboy, of a gaucho, as the image of a rural settler in Palestine. I mean, the symbolics of land and earth. It's something also very very valid, but. I mean, we could also ask ourselves why the connection with land and farming couldn't be defined as female. Like in Hebrew, Adama, it's female, right? The earth is female, so we could potentially. I mean, theoretically, there could be this kind of like definition of a female settler as someone who brings us closer to the. I mean, which brings us closer to the Mother Earth and physical work and etc. etc. There are many questions coming. I'm trying to.
We have Mo.
Yeah.
A two-part question from Mo.
I think it would be helpful to read out the question out loud.
Yeah. I will maybe start with the question of Jay Rubin. Did Polish Jewish immigrants to Argentina reflect the political divisions of Polish Jewry, socialist, Zionist, communist, Orthodox, religious, and so on and so forth? This is a very good question, and like I think I suggested in my presentation that. The people who immigrate, they are very specific people, and they do not represent the overall Polish Jewry, right? In order to immigrate, you need to make this step, right? And you need to question you need to question the tradition to a certain extent. You need to tell to yourself that your family ties are maybe not the most important thing in your life, and that you are like willing to go away. And but in general, speaking about the political divisions, the left wing Jewish movements were very prominent in Argentina, especially in this period following the Russian Revolution, 1905. Many people who were persecuted in Tsarist Russia because of political activism in left-wing organization also found their way in Argentina, and many people with political experience, maybe not exactly in the parties, but in the workers' union, I mean, they were also very prominently featured in the migration. I think Latin American Zionism it's something which starts to be important political power only in the 1930s and in fact only later on. I think we do not have a lot of Zionist political life in Argentina before 1930s. I hope it answers the questions.
Okay, from Mo, thanks so much for this insightful talk. I have two questions. First, what was the relationship between the Polish Jewish community and other Gentile East and Central European first-generation immigrants? And second, how was or is the relationship with the Mizrahi Jews who formed the second wave of Jewish immigration from Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt in the 50s and 60s?
Thank you for this question. I'm not sure if I can answer these very broad questions. And starting with the first one, I usually get this question, and people ask, what was the relation between Jewish Poles and Christian Poles, which were immigrating to Argentina in the same time, and then I'm usually answering that in the sources there is hardly any mention of that, right? And I think it's partially related to the fact that the Jewish in the interwar years, right? The Jews were mostly settling in Buenos Aires, and Polish peasants or Ukrainian peasants were usually going northwards, right, to Misiones and Entre Rios and all these northern provinces. So I usually tend to think that there was not exactly a kind of like a geographical or like place of meeting between Jewish and non-Jewish immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe. There was like in Buenos Aires, Polish embassy was a kind of like was a venue where Polish Jews and non-Jews were meeting, but it wasn't something regular, right? Like, so when you have let's say Polish Independence Day, this is an occasion for Polish Jews and newer. I forgot, but there is a recent book about the kind of like transnational Bundist links between Eastern Europe, Argentina, and the United States. I don't have it now in my mind the title, but sure. I mean, there was Bund was important.
Okay, and Nathan Silverstein, one of our graduate students here at UT. Question from Nathan Silverstein, founder and president of the Polish Club at UT and a proud Polish Jew. How do you go about being a proud Polish Jew, given the rocky history of Polish-Jewish relations? Wow, difficult question.
Just a second, I'm trying to get this question again. Yeah. I think one of the arguments of this book that we should think about migration also in the context of sub-ethnic history. So quite often, we tend to define things very broadly. We speak about Eastern European Jewish immigrants, and we are kind of like losing the potential which lies in these sub-ethnic identifications. And I think that migration is a kind of like a catalyst, like something which makes the sub-ethnicity stronger. You might not realize that you are a Polish Jew in Poland, and when you emigrate and when you settle somewhere, then you start to understand that you are a Polish Jew, and then you start to ask yourself, what is the essence of being a Polish Jew abroad, right? And I think, you know, I think in the Argentine case, I mean, this issue of like ethnic prestige or like ethnic pride is something which we are striving for in the process of upward social mobility, right? And you try to define your kind of like primordial ethnic background as something which allows you to progress as a capital, as a cultural capital, which allows you to achieve what you strive to achieve. And of course, you know, anti-Semitism was also an issue which appeared in the discussions, right? And I didn't of Polish Jews in Argentina. I didn't have time to speak about it today. But in the same way that they were organizing campaigns in order to support specific causes, they were also organizing protests against specific cases of anti-Semitism. So I think in 1936 there was something called a month of protests, like a Argentine Jewish rage against anti-Semitic incidents or like cases which were presented in a Jewish press worldwide. I think Avraham Novelstern is raising his hand. I'm not sure if you are
right. We have some comments of an irrelevant nature, to say the least, and also from Avraham. First, he thinks that Peretz's interest should have been mentioned. And then he says, regarding financial campaigns, you should see it in a broader context. Basically, Zionist fundraising with Zionist speakers coming to Argentina.
Yeah, I mean,
it's more of a comment than a question.
I mean, of course, I agree that that fundraising, like global fundraising, I mean, was and is something which is used by many actors, and this was something very, very typical for Zionism activism, and people who were let's say on the I mean, Yiddishists on the Jewish left, they were using the same tools or like the same mechanisms of raising global support for these specific causes.
And Per Lesnay has sort of added a footnote here to what Avram said about these Yiddish literary celebrities visiting Argentina for the Pen Club meeting in 1936. But you got these big names in Yiddish.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I will develop on that, but yeah, Yutlamet Perez, like the famous Yiddish writer, was kind of reflecting on Argentina, let's say, in his writing about.
And then Chernikovsky was there as well for this Pen Club meeting.
Yeah, I think I'm writing about this Pen Club meeting. I already forgot what I wrote in this, or what I wrote in this book now. I mean, you read my book 3 times, so maybe you remember it better than I. But definitely, like the Pen Club meeting was a very. I think that the fact that the representative of Yiddish literature was featured at the Congress in Buenos Aires, it was also an issue which is linked to this process of thinking, is Argentina peripheral? Where is Argentina in the world of Yiddish culture? What's the place of this country in Yiddish Yiddish letters? And the fact that the pen club meeting was there and the Yiddish literature was featured there prominently, it was also a kind of like a big event for the local community.
Mm-hmm. And then from Tatiana Lichtenstein, can you talk about the Jewish response to restrictive immigration in Argentina in the 1930s?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough about Argentine history, but you sort of mentioned early on in the talk that the immigration quotas became more restricted from Poland. Could you talk a little bit about what the local Jews did on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in Argentina, we do not speak about this like quota system as in the States. So basically, like what happens after in the 1930s there was a certain power change, and more conservative powers are coming, more conservative or even nationalist politicians are coming to power in Argentina, and immigration is not something which they are, and the immigration of Jews is not something which they exactly supporting. So they introduced a system called llamada, like that you need to call. Like, I mean, you need to have a family member in Argentina who sends for you, right? And who kind of like issues like, I think it was called affidavit in the American context, right? That, like, that someone takes responsibility for you. So it's not like in the case of the United States after 1924 that there is no migration. The migration from Poland and from other countries continues in the 1930s, but the level of immigration is slower. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I can answer the question about the ethnic activism and on this issue. I would say that towards the end of the 1930s, I found very interesting diplomatic documents between Poland and Argentina, and it was very interesting game, because Poland wanted the Jews out, let's say, and Argentina didn't want the Jews in. And I mean, there was kind of like a process of Polish authorities explicitly suggesting Jewish applicants to lie that they are farmers, that they are like agricultural workers, or even to present themselves as non-Jews in order to have an easier immigration path to Argentina. These were, I'm not sure if these documents were kind of, I'm not sure if this policy was kind of like openly known. I mean, this is something which appears from the diplomatic sources. I think it's 1938.
Okay, well, Mariusz, thank you for a really good lecture and for dealing with the questions and the invaders from somewhere in cyberspace, keeping your plum. And I've continued to enjoy your work. I look forward to seeing your new work that gets more into theory of masculinities. And just in general, thanks a lot for visiting us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.